Well, welcome to another Friday night. And we started this series on helping people with trauma, addiction, and some of the challenges that you face, some of the ways you can have great intentions but go in the wrong direction. And I want to end this series with some very practical tips, things that help you. Now, I need to say up front that if you're not a qualified counselor, don't listen to me tonight and say, okay, now I'm qualified to counsel. I want to just give you things that will help you better support your friends, but this is in no way a counseling course. If you are a counselor, hopefully some of these things will help you become an even better counselor, especially in this area of dealing with people with addiction and complex trauma. So let me start by just giving you a very big picture, some observations that you really need to have in your mind as you approach helping people in this field. And the first is this: people from complex trauma only can start healing when they're in an environment of safety. If they're still in an environment of danger, then they still have to use their survival tools. And those are unhealthy for a healthy life, but they let them survive. And so if you want them to learn healthy tools and heal, they need to be in a safe environment. And part of what that means is you must be a safe person. And so as a person comes to you for support or help, they are going to sense very quickly whether you can be trusted, whether you are safe, whether you're going to treat them with respect. And so what I tell counselors all the time as they train is this: part of being a good counselor is having lots of knowledge. But that's not the only piece of being a good counselor, especially in this field. To be a good counselor, you need knowledge, but you also have to be working on your stuff. And if you're not working on your stuff, that will make you unsafe. And people will not be able to heal in a relationship with you. The second thing that I think is important to understand is our counseling industry today is really kind of built around a model where you go once a week for a 1-hour session that can go for 6 weeks, 12 weeks, or even longer. That is not the ideal environment to help people with complex trauma heal. They will heal to a certain extent. But for a person from complex trauma to really heal at a very deep level, they need more than once a week counseling. They need an environment that is safe, an environment where they can learn, process their stuff, heal. They need a surrogate family. That is the best environment for people with complex trauma to heal. The next thing that I think is important, especially in severe complex trauma, is to realize that many of the people have severe anxiety issues. And so initially, your best way of helping them and supporting them might be online. They might not be ready yet to meet face-to-face or be part of a group face-to-face experience. And the final big picture thing I need to say is this: success in counseling is not 100% dependent on the counselor. The counselor has a great responsibility, but much depends on the willingness of the client to change. And if they're not willing to change, you can have the best counselor in the world and they're not going to be successful. And so you must have capable counseling, but clients who are willing to change. Another thing that is important to understand in dealing with people from complex trauma is the stages of healing. So there is an initial and ongoing knowledge stage, learning material to understand trauma, greater self-awareness, knowledge of self, of your wounds, how they affect you, the things that trigger your wounds, your main issues that come out of those wounds, your patterns of behavior, thinking, and emotions once your wounds are triggered. That is an essential part of the healing journey, and that's usually where we begin. Then there's all those wounds that need therapy, that there's a healing element. And for many people, that takes on the picture in their mind of healing the little them, their inner child, if you want to say, but it's understanding how the little them was wounded, where the little them has been left behind and is not healed or been able to grow up, and to help that part of them heal and grow up. And that can be a very raw but very healing, cathartic process. And then learning new tools for what does a healthy life look like? How do I become healthy in relationships, and my coping is such an important part. And then learning to parent themselves, learning how to meet their needs, learning how to implement tools, learning how to regulate their emotions, learning how to be compassionate to themselves instead of beating themselves up. All of those are essential pieces in this healing journey. But then they need people. They need a healthy support network. You can't do it alone. But it's not just people in their life that they have superficial relationships with. They need a few people that they connect with, that they can be authentic with, that they have a healthy, growing intimacy with. That is an essential piece in the healing journey, and that's a very scary piece. And then they need ongoing support. Opportunities for meetings, groups, opportunities to still check in with a counselor and process how they're doing and issues that come up. And that ongoing support can go on for years. So that is a bit of an overview of the healing journey. Now let me take you to some very important concepts to appreciate and understand within the world of dealing with complex trauma. So on our first night, we talked about burnout or secondary stress trauma. So to prevent that, you need what we call emotional detachment. Now, a lot of people, when they think of emotional detachment, they get the idea that it means you don't care. But no, emotional detachment is really caring deeply, but with good boundaries, good internal boundaries. So that means I care for the clients deeply, and I do what is necessary that I can do, but I don't do their stuff for them. I don't do the stuff they need to do. So I care, I participate, but I detach when it comes to taking on their responsibilities. Or another way to say that is, I care deeply, but I don't take it home with me. I don't allow it to begin to take over my life so that it begins to consume me. I'm able to separate from it and leave it when the time comes that I need to leave it. So think of it in terms of your children. I care deeply for my kids. I'm prepared to get my hands dirty to help them, to help where I can, to cry with them. But what I know as a parent, to be healthy and to have healthy children, I need to have some emotional distance at times from my kids so I can remain objective. And I have to watch out from becoming enmeshed with them and doing their stuff for them. So I need to find that line where my caring is always there, but where my participation in their healing journey stops, because it would interfere with what they need to do. So emotional detachment is very important. Now, having said that, for a lot of people from complex trauma who are now wanting to help, their way of emotional detachment is just to close your heart to the very people you're trying to help. And so what I am saying is not that. What I am saying is we keep our heart open We care deeply, but we learn to have boundaries. And so that means we have to be aware of our own tendencies to fall into codependent-like relationships, which can happen in counseling, or becoming enmeshed with our clients. It feels good, it feels like we're needed and appreciated, but it really hurts us and it hurts them and prevents them from the growing and healing that they need to do. So learning emotional detachment in a healthy way is absolutely essential if you're going to help in this field. The second concept that is so important to understand is your limbic brain and your cortex brain. And what happens in complex trauma is you live in your limbic brain. That's your emotional center. That's your survival center. That's the child's brain. But what happens because of complex trauma is it hijacks the limbic brain and prevents you from growing into a healthy cortex-type living where you make decisions based on what's healthy long-term, and it keeps you in the instant protection, instant gratification focus, which ends up being very foolish decisions that feel good in the moment but hurt you in the long run. And so a lot of people, when they try to understand themselves, realize there's this struggle within, and they're not sure how to explain it, but it's the limbic brain in conflict with the cortex. They disagree on what's the right course of action. And so what happens and what you need to understand is the struggle that clients have is not because they're bad people, because that's what they'll think about themselves often. The struggle is because their brain has been messed up by complex trauma, and now the limbic is in opposition to the cortex. And so you get out of kind of you're a bad person to that's a natural struggle from trauma. Let's learn how to let the cortex be in the driver's seat instead of the limbic brain. Let's learn how to heal our limbic brain, which has become such a negative influence, so that it can become a positive influence again. And so helping people understand what is going on in their brain is absolutely essential. The third concept is emotional dysregulation. So the result of trauma is that you're triggered and you go from 0 to 100 in a nanosecond. That's what you need in order to fight or flight. That's what you need to survive. And so you don't regulate your emotions. Triggered, dysregulate. But when you are dysregulated, 0 to 100, usually there's an anger element that just goes out of control. Usually you lash out. You become unreasonable, irrational. People can't discuss things with you. You have higher expectations of others. And so it can do a lot of damage when you are dysregulated to all the people you love. And so what is very important in starting to work with people with complex trauma is giving them basic tools to learn to regulate their emotions when they're triggered. And so those are basic grounding exercises that will help them learn to regulate their emotions better. Absolutely essential. So that leads us to the next one, triggers. So what can happen for a person coming out of complex trauma is they can function very well in 90% of their life. And they can look to be very successful, very competent, very mature. It's just in the 10%, in the times when they're triggered and they emotionally dysregulate, that they get messed up. But that time of being triggered puts them in great danger. So what you need to understand is what happens in a trigger is a wound from little me is being poked. It is being aggravated. And I'm reacting, the little me, to protect myself again. And so I go into fight, flight. I dysregulate. And I act out, I do all the old things to try and protect myself, but I go into my limbic brain. And so what it means then is you're going 90% of your life in your cortex, but when you're triggered, you go back powerfully into your limbic brain and you make decisions that can do a lot of damage. There's another part you need to understand. When you go back into your limbic brain because that little you is being aggravated, a wound is being poked, you feel the age of that little you again. And you feel the emotions of that little you again. You feel helpless to do anything about it. And so what you do if you're helping a person like that is realizing you're not that age now. You're not helpless. You now have tools. You now have supports. And you help them walk through that trigger. Because when they're in that triggered limbic brain place, everything becomes distorted. Lies seem like the truth. And they need help to get through that. There's another key concept. I call it default setting or your autopilot or what has been your normal for so long. That's where you gravitate back to without even realizing it, subconsciously. And so for a person from complex trauma, that's an unhealthy place. That's a place where you're negative. That's a place where your emotions are negative. That's a place where your thinking is distorted. That's a place where you're fight, flight, avoid, numb. And so what becomes absolutely essential for a person in recovery from trauma to understand is that without them realizing it, they will gravitate back to their default setting. And when that happens, and usually without them being aware, they are in a dangerous place. And if they don't recognize what's going on, within a day or two, they can be in a really bad place. And so, what we teach clients for this is mindfulness. Being an observer of yourself. Taking an emotional inventory a couple times a day. Just to say, where am I at? So that you can see whether you're sliding back to your default harmful setting or not. And if you spot it, you can turn it around and change it. There's another piece to this, a key concept. Emotional disconnection. So it's not just emotional dysregulation, but also disconnection. So in complex trauma, when you're getting hurt, and you're angry, and you're sad, and you're full of fear, and everything you do to try to fix the problems doesn't help, you can't resolve the problems, pretty soon you have mainly negative emotions and lots of them. And if you can't resolve them, then your only solution to try and have a somewhat happy life is to shut your emotions down, to disconnect from them. And so for most people from complex trauma, part of their default setting is disconnecting from their emotions. Their emotions are still happening, but they're not aware. And that's dangerous because their emotions can still be very negative and happening and triggering their limbic brain and running their life, but they're cut off from that. Or they can be heading back to the default setting of negative emotions but disconnected from them, and pretty soon be in a lot of danger and not even be aware of it. And so a key part of this is, again, that mindfulness where you stop and connect to your emotions throughout the day, being aware of where you're at. Because to disconnect from your emotions is to put yourself in great danger. So those are just some very important concepts you need to understand in the world of complex trauma and helping people. Now let me go into some roles that you might have if you are helping people. So the first thing that I see as my role when I meet somebody with complex trauma is I need to understand them. I need to get to know them. I don't want to put them in a pigeonhole. I don't want to make assumptions about them. I want to make sure I understand their trauma, how it affected them, I want to understand all the forces that shape them. And so what I do is a history with the people that I meet. So let me just kind of get you to imagine you've come into my office, and here's some of the things that I would ask. I'd say, tell me about your mom and dad. Occupation, what did they do for a living? What was mom's personality like? What was dad's personality like? What was their relationship as a couple like? Tell me about the emotions that you experienced in your home. Was there a lot of anger? Was everybody required to be happy? Was there a lot of sadness? Tell me if there was any abuse, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse. How about neglect? Did either of your parents have addiction issues? Did either have mental health issues? Was there much conflict in your home? What was your parents' financial position like? Did you move very often? What is your ethnic background, your cultural background? Did your parents go through a divorce? What was their religious priority in their life? And then I go, tell me about your siblings. How many did you have? Where did you fit? Were you the oldest, youngest, in the middle? Were you an only child? What were your relationships like with your siblings? And then tell me about school. How did you do in academics? How did you do in sports? Extracurricular activities. Were you bullied at all? Did you develop any hobbies during that time? And then tell me about your friends. Did you have many friends? Were you kind of a popular person or a very quiet loner type person? Tell me about your first romantic relationship. How old were you? Tell me how it happened. And then tell me about your romantic life as an adult. Have you been married, divorced? How many breakups? Give me a sense of the pattern of how your relationships develop, what you look for in a mate, how they progress, those kind of things. And then tell me about your mental health. What have you been diagnosed with? What medications are you on? Tell me if there's been any sexual abuse. Or tell me if when you were exposed to sexual things, at what age were you? Tell me about any addiction stuff that you had from food, gambling, drugs, marijuana, alcohol, whatever. Help me understand your addictions. And usually there's a sexual part I would inquire about there as well. Do you have any children today? How many? How old are they? What kind of issues have you seen in their development? Are they in your care? Are they in or in the custody of your partner or your ex? Are they with Child and Family Services? Help me understand that. Tell me about any significant losses that you've gone through in your life. How about criminal activities, charges, problems with the law? Any one event type trauma, car accident, getting knocked out in hockey or football? What have you been exposed to as far as religion, spiritual? And what have you done as far as other programs to try and get help for yourself? All of those things are very important when you want to begin to understand a person and the forces that shape them. Now, let me just stop and say this. Please be very aware that as people open up to you, you might realize there's a lot of damage here. Sexual abuse, severe physical abuse. I am out of my depth. I do not know how to help a person here. Don't be afraid to say that to the person. Say, you know what? I see you've got a lot of very painful stuff here. I don't think I'm qualified or capable of helping you. I can help you try to find somebody. I'm willing to listen, but I want you to know kind of that's the extent of what I can offer you at this point. Okay, so once you've got a history taken, now what I am doing in my mind is looking for how did that affect them? What did it create under the surface in them, in their beliefs, in their underlying issues? And this is such an important thing. Understand this. When a client comes to you, they may think they know what their issues are, but if they've not been exposed to understanding complex trauma and programs that would teach it, there's a good chance they really don't have a good sense of their underlying issues yet. And so part of your role can be to point them to some of their underlying issues. If they're aware of any issues, they might say, yes, I have anger issues, I have anxiety, fear issues. Maybe they would admit they have some codependent relationship issues. But beyond that, this is where you would begin to steer them in the right direction. If they have complex trauma at all, they will have some shame issues that they may not be aware of at all. But you be aware of that. They may have huge abandonment issues that they're not aware of. They may never have had secure attachment in relationship, and they have huge attachment issues. They may have these unfulfilled longings that have become hyper desires for validation, connection, just to be loved. They may be disconnected from their emotions altogether and be just in their head and think they're healthy because of that. And then one of the other things I'm looking for is, if they have shame, they don't value themselves. So what did they use to try to get a sense of value? Was it the amount of money they had? Was it their body? Was it what they could accomplish? Was it their job, their status? Was it how smart they are? Look for those things to give you a clear picture of what's going on beneath the surface. There's something else that I need to point out here. When you deal with people with trauma, you have what I call crisis counseling and ongoing counseling or ongoing care. Crisis counseling is usually when they phone you and say, I need help, and it's because some crisis has taken place. They're emotionally dysregulated, they're threatening to leave their partner, all kinds of stuff is going on. And so your job there is just to help to de-escalate them, get them back to a place where they can think rationally and come up with a plan of action. But that's just a very, very small part of what is involved in counseling somebody with complex trauma. Now we come to the ongoing part. And this is where you begin to explore the underlying issues. Explore the wounds caused by trauma, the longings caused by trauma, helping them understand their patterns, helping them begin to heal and get healthy tools. All of that is there. So what usually happens when you're working with a person is you get their history. Then you begin to work on some of the underlying issues by going back to their younger years, exploring those events more, helping them understand how they affected them more. And so you're focusing on the past for a while. But then after a while, what begins to happen is the client will come and, how are you doing? And you focus on the present. But what I know is as I focus on the present, stuff is going to happen in the present that's going to trigger them. And when they're triggered, that's going to take me and get me to help them go back to the past and understand what that trigger is all about. Because that trigger is pointing us to an area that needs healing and growth. And so I'm content to work in the present knowing that it will keep taking me back to the past, so I'll be working in the present and past at the same time. And that tends to be what happens. The next role that you would have is helping them understand who they are. people from complex trauma have shut down authenticity because it meant they would get hurt if they were authentic. And they've worn masks all their life, adopted roles. And so their question is, who am I? I don't know. And so I am wanting to mirror back to them. But I need to get to know them first. And so are they an introvert or an extrovert? Are they artistic? Are they creative? Are they very analytical, very logical? What's their learning style? What's their emotional makeup? How do they express emotions naturally? That's part of what I'm wanting to understand. Then as you're reflecting that back to them and helping them see what you see in their life, what you're going to find is that as they grow, they're going to learn new tools and change, but then they're going to get some confusion. So you're going to get questions like this. When I'm nice to that person, is it because I'm genuinely nice, or is it because I'm a codependent, a people pleaser? And they go, I think it might be a bit of both. And that's confusing and frustrating for them because they want to be either pure nice or pure codependent people pleaser, not some mix. And so you're helping them realize that as you grow, there's going to be a mix, and that's okay. But we're going to just keep growing until more and more of healthy nice comes out and less codependent. And then you might get a client who's never stood up for themselves, never set a boundary. And now they take the risk of doing that. They stand up for themselves and set a boundary, and then they come back and go, was that healthy, or was I being selfish or narcissistic by demanding or requesting that people meet my needs by saying no to others? And that will be confusing. And then they're going to ask at times, okay, here's how I'm behaving. I think I'm being genuine, but I'm not sure if it's still a mask. And so again, you're helping them understand the difference between masks and genuine, and that's often there's a blend as they grow, and that's okay. But you're helping them understand who they are, and that's an ongoing, lengthy journey. Next, validate them. Complex trauma, most kids were never validated. They weren't told what they were good at. They weren't told the good qualities they had. They were validated sometimes for accomplishments or only when they did bad. And so they learned to minimize. So if they, as a little person, had pain and their parents said, get over it, quit making such a big deal out of it, it's nothing. They doubt their own ability to validate themselves accurately and tend now to minimize their pain. And so if they share pain, they go, well, it must not be that bad, or I think I'm just being a burden because it's not as bad as what other people are going through. Validate their pain. Because healing can't happen until you validate the pain. As long as you minimize it, you hinder healing. And we can play an important role in validating their pain. Also validate their thinking. Because now as they're thinking stuff through, they're going to go, okay, I think this is the right way, but I'm not sure. And so now they need somebody they can bounce their ideas and thoughts off of, who will then say, yeah, that's good thinking. I like how you're thinking. You're bang on. And that just reinforces that they're growing and helps them grow even more. So be aware of this. In the beginning, you do a lot of thinking for them. That is a necessary thing because their thinking has been so distorted. But you don't want to continue to do their thinking for them for the rest of their life. You want to teach them how to think for themselves, how to weigh out pros and cons, how to think long-term consequences, what is healthy. They may not like you backing away and letting them think more and more, because that makes it possible for them to think and fail. And so sometimes they'll try to stay dependent on you and keep you to think for them. But resist that and encourage them to learn to think for themselves. And you can be there as a sounding board. Just a few final things. Begin to use my sense is, or I sense, instead of saying, this is what you are. So I might say to a person, my sense is that you really have some issues around your father that you maybe haven't looked at. Something like that. Or as a person is making decisions and proceeding in their recovery, I might see them falling into stuff that potentially is dangerous. They might be getting into a relationship. They might be going back to work. And I might sit them down, and instead of saying, you're not ready for this, or this is a dumb idea, I might say, I have some concerns about this, and here's what they are. And I give it to them to chew on. I'm always keeping track of what they're saying and then saying it back to them. So when they do a history, I hear it and then I say, okay, let me tell you what I heard when you told me your life story. And I say it back and I highlight some things that start pointing to their issues. But also as they're telling all of their story, I'm paying attention to lies that they have picked up and believe on this journey. Don't take them to painful memories if they're not capable of going there. Don't take them to painful memories if they don't have the tools to process it. Because all you will do is re-traumatize them. And so just encourage them to just hold those for a while and just work on getting some healthy tools for now. Two final things. Part of your job with complex trauma is to remind them of truth, the same truth, over and over again. And that's because they slide back to their default setting so easily. And part of their default setting is the lies that go with that setting. And so they need to be reminded weekly, pretty much for a while, of important truth that just keeps them on track. And then finally, my job as a counselor is to work myself out of a job. My job is to help them heal and become an adult. My job is recognizing that I'm dealing with a physical adult, but a wounded inner child that needs healing, tools, growth. And as I parent them, I'm teaching them to parent themselves so that they need me less and less. But like my role as a father, my kids have all left home. They don't need me very much, but there's still times when they do need me to bounce an idea off or to help them process something they can't figure out on their own. So even though I'm helping clients grow up and need me less, I'm also aware that they still probably are going to need me at times, and I need to be available to support them in those times. That's the end of part one. I hope that gives you some very helpful tools that will just make you better at helping people that you love and care about. We're going to take a short break, and then I'm going to come back and do the Christian part. And if that doesn't interest you, we don't want you to feel any pressure from us to watch that. You're free to go. I'll be back in just a minute. Well, welcome back. We've been looking at Peter, one of Jesus' 12 disciples who became a prominent leader, once Jesus returned to heaven. And he was a guy that had lots of issues that I want to talk about because I think it helps us in our recovery journey. And tonight I want to come to Matthew 16, and it's a dialogue that Jesus had with his disciples, but Peter becomes a spokesperson in the dialogue. So let me read it to you. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, now that's way up to the very north of Israel, the most northern area. So Jesus takes his disciples up there, and it was a city that was built for Herod Philip. And so he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I, the Son of Man, am?" Well, they replied, "Some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, some say Jeremiah or one of the prophets." And then he asked them, "Who do you say that I am?" Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." So we have watched you now long enough to know and be convinced that you are the one God promised to send to deliver us, the Messiah, the Anointed One. Jesus replied, "You are blessed, Peter, son of John, because my Father in heaven has revealed this to you." He's opened your eyes to see it. "You did not learn this from another human being. Now I say to you that you are Peter," which means rock, "and upon this rock," and it's a different word for rock, it's a big boulder type rock, a mountain type rock, "upon this rock I will build my church, and all the powers of hell or the gates of hell will not conquer it." Now this is a very well-known section of Scripture within most churches, but it's also a very controversial one. And it's been used to kind of say that Peter was the first pope and a bunch of different interpretations. And I don't pretend to know what the exact interpretation is, and I don't want to be embroiled in conflict. But about 4 years ago, I came across a reference article that talked about this. And for the first time, it seemed to make all the pieces fit. And so I just want to share that with you because I think what Jesus is saying to Peter is absolutely exciting when you begin to understand the passage the way I'm going to present it. So Caesarea Philippi was a city that was built in Mount Hermon, at the base of Mount Hermon. It was built, as you can see, in the rock. And so it was the city on the rock of the rock. It was the rock city built out of rock. Now, it was considered by the Jewish leaders, religious leaders, to be the most evil part of Israel, the most pagan, the furthest from God. And that's because it was there that they had the center for the worship of the god Pan, P-A-N. Now, the god Pan was the goat god. It was the shepherd's fertility god. It was part man and part goat. Now, I'm not going to show you a picture of it because there's so lewd representations of this goat god. And so the worship of the goat god, Pan, involved all kinds of sexual acting out dances and ceremonies. And that's why this area was considered to be the most evil part of Israel. It was kind of written off by the rest of Israel, especially the religious leaders, as being beyond saving. Now, at the base of Caesarea Philippi, there's this pool, which you can see. And I've been there and actually drank water from it. But what was believed was that it was bottomless, that they had not been able to find a bottom to this pool of water. And so the theory came up that the gods entered this pool down, and the bottom exited into the underworld. And so it became known as the gates of Hades, the gates of hell, the gates of the underworld. All of that then fits with what Jesus is saying. On this rock here at Caesarea Philippi, I will build my church, and the gates of hell, all of the spirits and evil connected with the worship of the god Pan, won't be able to conquer it. So this area then, one way to look at it, was considered to be Satan's stronghold. A place that nobody had been able to conquer. A place that many doubted God could even conquer. And so Jesus takes his disciples there, to the most impossible place. And he says to them, right here, I'm going to build my church. I'm going to come to the place where everybody's written off as beyond hope. And I'm going to succeed where nobody else has succeeded. I am going to defeat the enemy in his most powerful stronghold. And what Jesus is saying to the disciples is this: when I leave, I'm going to set you loose on the world. You're going to walk into the darkest areas that everybody basically says are beyond hope. You are going to go to places where there's never been any success, and you're going to watch me work through you and build my church in those places. Want to know what I love about that? Many would say that severe trauma, those people are kind of hopeless. And that's why I love this, because Jesus says, not to me. I can move into the most hopeless places, and through my power, I can bring life and health and family, and that's what church means. I'm going to build my family, my community there. Now, Jesus isn't saying it's going to be easy, magical, just go in there and say, okay, success, and it's just going to happen. No, he goes on in John 12 to say, I tell you the truth. Unless a kernel of wheat or a seed of wheat is planted in the soil, that seed then must die if you want to have a plant grow from that seed. And so, if it dies and is willing to die, it won't just produce one seed, it'll produce many seeds. So what he is saying to his disciples is, I'm calling you to go to dark places that seem hopeless, where evil has reigned, and I want you to be willing to make sacrifices. I want you to be willing to lay down your life if necessary. But as you work with me, as you sacrifice with me, you will see me create my community in the darkest places. And that gives me hope. Let's pray. Father, thank you that Peter learned this lesson and was one of the first to go into some of the darkest places and see you work, even though it eventually cost him his life. And I just pray that you would encourage each of us. Help us to trust you. Help us to really want to be part of what you're doing, where you're doing it. Amen. Well, that's the end of another Friday. Thank you so much for being part of this, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great weekend.